The house was already loud when I walked in, the kind of loud that comes from too many voices trying to sound important at the same time. Christmas music hummed through ceiling speakers that had probably cost more than my first car. Someone had gone heavy on the pine-scented candles. The place looked perfect in the way only staged perfection can: gleaming counters, spotless floors, glasses arranged like props. I wasn't late. I was just not early enough to help, which was fine by me. I had come straight from base, changed into a simple dress, and left my uniform behind for once. No rank, no last name on a chest patch. Just family. That was the idea anyway. Vanessa was already holding court near the kitchen island, a glass of red wine in one hand, the other moving as she talked. Designer dress, flawless hair, laughter that carried farther than it needed to. People leaned in when she spoke. They always did. My parents stood close by, proud, in the way that only comes when they think the picture looks right. I kept to the edge of the room, nodding when people greeted me, answering the same questions I always did. How's work? Are you still in the army? Do you like it? I said yes, yes, and yes, in that order, and kept it moving. At some point, I picked up a tray of glasses from the counter. It felt easier to be useful than to hover. The space between the kitchen and the dining area was tight, guests packed shoulder to shoulder. Someone laughed behind me. Someone else stepped back without looking. The bump wasn't dramatic. A shoulder into my arm, enough to throw me off balance for half a second. The wine sloshed out of the glass and splashed forward. It landed on Vanessa's dress. The room didn't go quiet right away. There was a beat where people processed what they'd seen, where a few nervous laughs slipped out, where someone said, "Oh," and stopped. Vanessa turned fast. Her face changed before she even looked down. When she did, her mouth tightened like she'd bitten into something sour. I started to apologize. The words didn't make it all the way out. Her hand came across my face hard enough that my head turned. The sound cut through the room, clean and sharp. The kind of sound that doesn't echo because it doesn't need to. For a second, no one moved. "Are you blind?" she shouted, loud, clear, not a joke, not a slip. "Watch where you're going. Are you blind?" Every pair of eyes in the room found me. Some people looked uncomfortable. A few looked curious. No one stepped in. I stood there, my cheek burning, my hand still holding the tray, because muscle memory doesn't shut off, just because the moment has gone sideways. I could taste copper. I set the tray down slowly on the counter. Glass clinked against glass. Vanessa was still breathing hard, like she'd worked herself up for this and was proud of it. She didn't look at me again. She was already checking the stain, already waving someone over to get napkins. My mother moved first. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't look at my face. Her eyes went straight to the dress. "Oh my God," she said, pulling Vanessa closer. "This was custom. Do you know how much this cost?" Then she turned to me. "Apologize to your sister," she said. "Right now. You embarrassed her." The words came out fast, practiced, like she'd been waiting for the chance to say them. I looked at my father. Old habit. He stood near the front of the house, one hand already on the door. He didn't say anything. He just pulled it open and stepped to the side. Cold air rushed in from outside. Snowflakes drifted across the entryway. The message was clear. People shifted. Someone cleared their throat. A couple near the fireplace suddenly found the tree very interesting. Vanessa finally glanced over, eyes sharp, chin lifted. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked satisfied. I didn't apologize. I didn't argue either. I picked up my coat from the chair where I'd left it and walked toward the door. My mother said my name, the version she uses when she wants control back. I kept moving. Outside, the cold hit my face and dulled the sting on my cheek. The driveway lights threw long shadows across the snow. I heard the door close behind me. Music picked back up inside like nothing had happened. I walked to my car and sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. No shaking, no tears, just a steady awareness of where I was and what had just been confirmed. This wasn't about a dress, it never was. I drove away from the house, tires crunching over packed snow, the windows fogging slightly as the heat kicked in. The road down the hill curved through trees wrapped in white lights. Park City looked calm, almost polite, like it always does when it wants to pretend nothing ugly ever happens here. I'd spent years learning how to keep my reactions in check. Training has a way of sanding down the parts of you that want to explode. You learn to wait. You learn to observe. You learn that not every moment calls for a response. By the time I reached my apartment, the burning in my cheek had faded into a dull reminder. I hung my coat by the door, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the quiet. No music, no voices, just the low hum of the heater and the city beyond the windows. I didn't replay the slap. I didn't imagine different outcomes. I went straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my email. The message was short. No emotion, no explanations. I asked my attorney to review my files and begin a standard asset and contract check. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, just a request to look at what was already in place. I sent it, closed the laptop, and turned off the light. Outside, snow kept falling soft and steady, covering tire tracks, smoothing everything out. Inside, the room stayed exactly as it was. The heater clicked on as I leaned back in my chair, the room filling with a low, steady hum that made the quiet feel intentional. I stood there for a moment, coat still on, then slipped it off and hung it neatly by the door. Old habits die hard. I poured a glass of water, took a sip, and felt the coolness settle everything down a notch. My phone stayed face down on the desk. No buzzing, no follow-ups. That was fine. I changed out of the dress and folded it once before setting it aside. The mark on my cheek had faded to a pale warmth, the kind you forget about until you touch it. I didn't touch it. I washed my hands, dried them, and turned the lights off in the kitchen before walking back into the living room. Snow kept falling outside the window, blurring the city into a soft smear of white and amber. Park City always looks peaceful at night. It sells the illusion well. I sat down, opened my laptop again, and checked the sent folder. The email was there, time-stamped and unremarkable. Good. I closed it without rereading and slid the laptop into my bag. That part was done. The next morning started early, not because I had to be anywhere, but because I couldn't sleep past my normal routine. The sky was still dark when I stepped outside, boots crunching on fresh snow. The cold was sharp and clean, the kind that wakes you up better than coffee. I ran through the motions, stretch, jog, breathe, letting my body take the lead while my mind stayed quiet. By the time I got back, my phone had messages. Vanessa first. A long string of texts, heavy on punctuation, light on responsibility. Accusations wrapped in fake concern. She didn't mention the slap. She didn't need to. It was implied that I had overreacted by leaving. My mother followed a minute later. Shorter. Colder. A reminder about family and Christmas. A suggestion that I should apologize to keep things smooth. She ended with a heart emoji like that, softened the edges. My father's name appeared last. No message, just a missed call. I put the phone back in my pocket and went inside. At the office, everything felt normal. Too normal. Emails about schedules. A meeting moved up by 15 minutes. Someone asking if I could review a logistics report before lunch. I said yes to all of it and meant it. During a break, I stepped into a quiet hallway and called Major Alvarez. He answered on the second ring, voice steady, already halfway into whatever he'd been working on. I didn't explain the party. I didn't need to. I told him I was dealing with a personal situation that involved family and finances, and that I wanted to be careful. He didn't ask for details. He never does. Keep it clean, he said. Anything that touches money and family gets messy fast. You don't want that bleeding into your file. I know. Then take it slow. Paper beats emotion every time. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Back at my desk, I worked through the morning without checking my phone again. When lunch came around, I ate at my desk and scanned a few reports I'd put off. Routine has a way of narrowing your focus to what actually matters. That afternoon, an email came in from my attorney's office. Not results, just confirmation. Files received. Review underway. Timeline outlined. No promises, no drama. I replied with a simple acknowledgement and went back to work. That evening, I stopped by the grocery store on the way home. I picked up the basics and stood in line behind a couple arguing quietly about whether they needed more wrapping paper. Christmas decorations hung from the ceiling, cheerful and relentless. I paid, bagged my things, and walked out. When I got home, I cooked something simple and ate standing up. The TV stayed off. I didn't need noise filling the space. Later, I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand and scrolled through the messages I'd ignored. Vanessa's tone had shifted. Less aggressive now, more confused. She asked why I was being weird. She suggested we talk things out. She ended with, "You know how mom gets." My mother sent another message, this one longer. She talked about appearances, about how people had noticed I left early, about how it reflected on them. My father finally left a voicemail. He didn't mention the door. He said I'd misunderstood the situation. He said he just wanted to keep the peace. I deleted the voicemail without replaying it. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. What I felt instead was something cleaner, more precise, a shift in how I categorized things. The night at the party hadn't created anything new. It had clarified what was already there. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I showed up to work. I trained. I answered emails. I didn't engage with family group chats or holiday planning threads. When my mother sent a photo of the tree and asked if I was coming by later in the week, I didn't respond. On Friday, another email came in from my attorney. Still no conclusions, just updates, requests for additional documents, a note about potential overlaps between personal loans and business accounts. The kind of language that reads dry until you know what it points to. I forwarded what they asked for and locked my phone. That night I stood by the window again, watching snow pile up on the ledge outside. Somewhere across town, my family was probably sitting around the same table, laughing a little too loudly, telling the same stories they always told. Vanessa would be the center of it. She always was. I thought about how easy it would have been to smooth things over. A call. An apology I didn't owe. A few words to make everyone comfortable again. I didn't make the call. Instead, I set my alarm, laid out my clothes for the morning, and turned the light off. The safe door swung open with a soft metallic click as I pressed the keypad and pulled it toward me, the weight of it steady and familiar. I hadn't opened it in months, maybe longer. Not because I'd forgotten what was inside, but because I hadn't needed to look at it to know where things stood. I set the binder on the desk and slid the chair closer, the leather creaking as I sat down. One lamp was enough. I didn't turn on the overhead light. The first folder held the house documents. Deed. Insurance, maintenance contracts, everything neatly labeled, signed, dated. My name sat at the top where it always had. Sole owner. No ambiguity. The house wasn't a gift. It never had been. It was a solution back when my father's business had collapsed, and the word bankruptcy started circling dinner conversations like a bad smell. I remembered that kitchen table. My father staring at his hands. My mother pacing. Vanessa scrolling on her phone, bored, already checked out. They'd needed the house to stay in the family name. They'd needed someone with clean credit and liquid assets. They'd needed me. I'd bought the place quietly and leased it back to them for $1 a year. No rent, no press, just paperwork. I flipped the page. The next folder was the thicker. Business agreements, loan schedules, promissory notes. Vanessa's boutique venture had started small, at least on paper. A single location. A modest line of credit. I'd insisted on contracts then, not because I didn't trust her, but because I trusted reality. Businesses fail all the time. Families fall apart when money goes missing. The terms were clear. Funds designated for operations only. Monthly reporting. Conduct clauses tied to reputation and investor risk. I'd copied language straight from deals I'd studied years earlier, long before the Army, when I still thought finance was going to be my world. Vanessa had signed without reading. She always did. I traced the line of her signature with my finger, then closed the folder and leaned back. Nothing in those pages had changed overnight. The leverage had been there the whole time. The difference was that I'd stopped pretending it didn't exist. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from my mother. "People are asking why you've been so distant." I turned the phone face down and opened the next folder. Utilities. Services. Accounts tied to the house. Everything routed through an umbrella account I controlled. I'd set it up that way for efficiency, or at least that's what I told myself. One place to manage bills. One place to keep things running smoothly. Smoothly had a cost. I stood up and paced the room, once then sat back down. There was a version of this where I could have used any of it immediately. Shut things off. Send notices. Force conversations no one wanted to have. That version would have felt satisfying for about 10 minutes and then followed me into every other part of my life. That wasn't an option. By Monday, my attorney's office had compiled a preliminary map of how everything connected. No conclusions yet. Just structure. Money flowing from one place to another. Paper trails overlapping in ways that raised eyebrows but not accusations. I spent my lunch break reading through the summary on my phone, standing by the window in a quiet stairwell. Numbers have a way of calming me down. They don't care how anyone feels about them. They either line up or they don't. Vanessa texted again that afternoon. She wanted to clear the air. She suggested brunch. She added a smiley face like that made it casual. I declined without explanation. That night I pulled the binder back out and laid the folders across the desk, spreading them out until the surface was covered. It looked excessive. It probably was. But seeing everything at once had a grounding effect. It reminded me how much I'd handled without ever being asked. I hadn't just paid for a house. I'd covered tax shortfalls, emergency repairs, temporary cash gaps that never quite closed. I'd wired money when suppliers needed to be paid, and Vanessa was waiting on a transfer. I'd done it quietly, telling myself it was easier than arguing. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought about the slap. Not the pain. The certainty behind it. The confidence that nothing bad would come from it. That confidence didn't come from nowhere. At work the next day, I sat through a briefing that ran long and asked a few pointed questions at the end. The colonel nodded. Notes were taken. Decisions moved forward. Accountability works when it's expected. On the walk back to my office, Major Alvarez fell into step beside me. He didn't ask how I was doing. He asked if I'd slept. Enough, I said. He glanced at my face, then looked ahead. Just remember, he said, you don't owe anyone an explanation if you're doing things the right way. I know. Good. That evening, I received another email from my attorney. Still careful. Still measured. But there was a new tone in the phrasing. Requests now had reasons attached. Certain transactions needed clarification. Some documentation didn't match timelines. I forwarded the email to a private folder and shut the laptop. Outside, the city was winding down. Lights flicked off one by one in nearby buildings. Somewhere a snowplow scraped along the street. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the counter, thinking about how often I'd smoothed things over in the past. How often I'd convinced myself that keeping everyone comfortable was the same as keeping the peace. It wasn't. Comfort just delayed consequences. The phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. A short message asking if we could talk. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an invitation to make things normal again. I typed out a response and deleted it. Then another. Deleted that too. Instead, I walked back to the desk and put the folders away one by one, locking the safe when I was done. The click sounded final, even though nothing had actually been decided yet. I turned off the lamp, leaving the room in darkness, and stood there long enough for my eyes to adjust. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, not charged, just clear. The next morning, I left early, the cold biting through my gloves as I crossed the parking lot. I felt lighter than I had in weeks, not because anything had resolved, but because I wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. At my desk, I opened my email and saw a new message waiting at the top of the list. I opened the email and scanned the first paragraph, then the second, letting the language settle before reacting to it. No conclusions, no accusations, just a request for clarification on several transactions that didn't line up cleanly. The kind of wording that stays neutral on purpose. I forwarded it to a secure folder and locked my screen. That morning's schedule didn't change because of my personal life. It never does. Briefing at 8. Logistics review at 10. A call with procurement after lunch. I moved through it all the same way I always had, listening more than I spoke, asking questions when they mattered, keeping everything tight. During a short break, I stepped into an empty conference room and pulled out my phone. I drafted a message to the legal assistance office on base, then reread it twice before sending. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't mention names. It asked about conflict of interest reporting for personal financial disputes involving immediate family. I sent it and put the phone away. The response came faster than I expected. An appointment slot opened for later that afternoon. The office was quiet when I arrived, the kind of quiet that comes from people dealing with things they'd rather not talk about. The captain across the desk didn't ask why I was there. She asked what I needed to disclose. I explained the situation in practical terms. Family property, business loans, a legal review already underway. No threats, no raised voices, just facts. She nodded, typing notes. "You're doing the right thing by flagging it early," she said. "As long as everything stays within civilian legal channels and doesn't intersect with your duties, you're fine. Document everything. Don't take shortcuts." "I don't plan to." "Good. And don't let anyone push you into reacting emotionally. That's where people get into trouble." That part landed harder than the rest. Back at my desk, I felt the weight of the constraints settle in. There were lines I couldn't cross, timelines I couldn't rush, satisfaction I couldn't afford. Whatever this became, it had to stand up to scrutiny from people who didn't care about Christmas dinners or sibling dynamics. Vanessa, of course, didn't know any of that. Her next message came while I was reviewing a shipping delay report. She wanted to know why I hadn't responded. She asked if I was trying to punish her. She suggested that Mom was worried. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled up the shared calendar I still had access to and noticed something small but telling. A vendor meeting scheduled under the boutique's account that didn't match any of the reports I'd seen. It wasn't proof of anything, just a discrepancy. The kind that gets flagged and followed, not confronted. I added a note and closed the app. That night I skipped the gym and went for a walk instead. The air was cold enough to sting the sidewalks packed down from earlier snowfall. Holiday lights flickered along the street, half of them already burned out. The town was busy without feeling alive. I thought about how often I'd been told I was too serious growing up. How Vanessa laughed when I chose ROTC over spring break trips. How my parents said it was just a phase, something I'd grow out of once I realized life was supposed to be fun. What they never understood was that discipline wasn't something I endured. It was something I chose. Back at the apartment, I heated leftovers and ate standing at the counter. My phone lit up again. This time it was my mother asking if I could come by the house to talk. She framed it like concern, but the subtext was familiar. Control disguised as care. I replied with a single sentence. "Not tonight." She didn't respond. The next few days followed a pattern. Work during the day. Emails at night. Documents reviewed, forwarded, organized. The attorney's office sent updates in careful increments, each one tightening the picture without saying it outright. Some of the boutique's expenses were personal. Some were questionable. A few were flat out inappropriate. Still, nothing moved fast. It wasn't supposed to. On Thursday, Major Alvarez stopped by my office unannounced. He leaned against the door frame and looked around like he was checking for eavesdroppers. "You look focused," he said. "I am. That's good. Just don't forget to breathe." I smiled despite myself. I'm not spiraling, I know. But situations like this have a way of testing people who think they're in control. "I don't think I'm in control," I said. "I think I'm responsible." He nodded once. That's the right word. That evening, I opened the binder again, not to dig for leverage, but to make sure everything was in order. Every document scanned. Every file labeled. If anyone ever asked why I'd done what I'd done, I wanted the answer to be obvious. The house paperwork sat on top. I didn't linger on it. What caught my attention instead was a series of small transfers in the boutique accounts that I hadn't noticed before. Not large enough to set off alarms. Frequent enough to matter. They were routed through a secondary account I didn't recognize. I didn't confront anyone. I forwarded the information and went to bed. Sleep came easily that night, which surprised me. There was no adrenaline left in the situation, no urge to act before thinking. Just a steady sense that things were moving in the right direction, even if the direction wasn't visible yet. The following morning, my phone buzzed while I was tying my boots. A message from my attorney's office marked urgent but not panicked. They'd identified a pattern. I read it once, then again, slower this time. The words stayed professional, but the implication was clear enough to change how everything fit together. I locked my phone and headed out into the cold. The sky still dark, the day already full. I zipped my jacket, stepped outside, and let the cold air hit my lungs hard enough to clear my head. The message stayed in my pocket as I walked to the car, unread notifications vibrating once and then going still. Patterns don't need immediate reactions. They need confirmation. Traffic was light that morning. Snow had slowed everything down just enough to keep people cautious. I drove with both hands on the wheel, the heater warming the cab while my mind stayed deliberately cool. By the time I parked, I'd already decided what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't call Vanessa. I wouldn't hint. I wouldn't warn anyone. At my desk, I logged in and pulled up the file the attorney's office had shared. Clean layout, color-coded charts, dates lined up in a way that made the picture unmistakable without spelling it out. Small transfers routed consistently, vendor names that repeated too often. Timing that matched personal expenses I recognized from conversations I'd half listened to over the years. I didn't react. I flagged the file and forwarded it to the secure drive I'd set aside for this. Then I opened my work inbox and got back to my actual job. By mid-morning, I was deep into a procurement review when my phone buzzed again. This time it was a calendar invite from my attorney for a brief call later that afternoon. No subject line beyond update. That was fine. Vanessa posted a photo around noon. Her boutique's account public. New arrivals. Perfect lighting. A caption about gratitude and growth. Comments poured in. Fire emojis. Compliments. People congratulating her on building something from nothing. I scrolled past it without stopping. The call with my attorney lasted 14 minutes. He didn't dramatize anything. He laid out next steps in plain language. Formal audit request submitted. Financial institutions notified. Compliance timelines established. Everything above board. Everything quiet. We'll need a little patience, he said. But once it's in motion, it doesn't stop on its own. That's the point, I said. After I hung up, I sat still for a moment and stared at the wall. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wanted to feel the weight of the decision before moving on. This wasn't leverage anymore. It was process. That evening, I stopped by a hardware store on the way home. Picked up light bulbs and batteries. Ordinary things. The kind you don't think about until they're gone. I paid, nodded to the cashier, and left. At home, I replaced a bulb in the hallway that had been flickering for weeks. The light steadied. I tossed the old bulb and washed my hands. My phone rang while I was drying them. Vanessa's name filled the screen. I let it ring. She called again a few minutes later. This time she left a voicemail. Her voice was brighter than it needed to be forced casual. She said she'd heard from Mom that I was being distant. She suggested dinner. She said we should clear the air before things got awkward. I deleted the message and set the phone down. 2 days passed without any major changes. Work stayed busy. The audit moved forward behind the scenes. My attorney sent brief updates that read more like weather reports than warnings. Progress steady. Cooperation received. No obstacles yet. Vanessa's tone shifted again. Her texts got shorter, less playful. She asked if something was wrong with the accounts. She mentioned a payment delay from a supplier. She said it was probably just a banking error. I didn't respond. My mother called that night. I answered this time not out of obligation, but curiosity. She didn't mention the party. She didn't mention the slap. She talked about stress, about how Vanessa had so much on her plate, about how family needs to support each other when things get complicated. I listened until she paused. I'm handling things responsibly, I said. That's all you need to know. She went quiet, then said my name in that careful tone she uses when she thinks she's losing ground. I ended the call before she could regain it. The next morning, I received an automated notice from one of the banks tied to the boutique accounts. Nothing alarming, just confirmation that a compliance review had been initiated. Routine language. No names, no accusations. Vanessa noticed it immediately. Her call came through while I was in a meeting. I declined it without looking at the screen. When I checked my phone later, there were 5 missed calls and a string of messages that jumped from confused to irritated to defensive in the space of 10 minutes. She asked if I'd done something. She said she couldn't access certain funds. She said this was bad timing. She said I was putting her business at risk. I read the messages once and archived the thread. That afternoon, Major Alvarez stopped by again. He didn't stay long, just long enough to ask how things were going. "By the book," I said. He nodded. "That's the only way this ends clean." As the week went on, the effects rippled outward. Subtle at first. A delayed shipment here, a postponed order there. Vanessa's social media posts slowed. The captions got vaguer. Gratitude replaced by hustle. Hustle replaced by silence. My mother sent fewer messages. When she did, they were shorter, less confident. She asked if everything was okay. I told her yes. At night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because anything had resolved, but because I wasn't carrying secrets that weren't mine to keep. On Friday, another update came in from my attorney. This one included attachments, transaction logs, authorization records, names that had appeared before now linked together in a way that removed any remaining doubt. I didn't open the attachments right away. I set my phone down, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window while snow started falling again. The city moved below, unaware and different. When I finally sat down and opened the files, the scope became clearer. What I'd suspected as mismanagement was something else entirely. Structured, repeated, signed off. One name appeared more than once in places it didn't belong. I closed the file. Not because I needed a break, because I needed to decide how to proceed without letting anything slip through the cracks. The coffee went untouched on the counter as I scrolled through the attachment again, slower this time, following the timestamps instead of the totals. The numbers told one story. The authorizations told another. Transfers that looked ordinary on the surface lined up too neatly once you stacked them side by side. Same windows of time, same routing, same approvals. One approval in particular kept showing up where it didn't belong. I zoomed in on the signature block and felt my jaw tighten. It wasn't Vanessa's. It wasn't a clerk's. It wasn't a bank officer's. The loops and pressure marks were familiar in a way I didn't want to acknowledge, the kind of familiarity that comes from years of holiday cards and school forms. I set the phone down and stood there until the room felt steady again. I didn't call my attorney right away. I pulled the binder out of the safe and laid it open on the desk, flipping to the power of attorney documents I'd signed years earlier, back when my mother insisted it was just a formality. In case of emergencies, she'd said, "So we don't bother you while you're working." The language was precise, limited authority, specific use, clear boundaries. The audit log showed those boundaries had been crossed. I emailed my attorney a single question attaching the page. Was this authorization valid? The reply came back within the hour. Short, direct, no. That was the moment the situation changed shape. Until then, it had been easy to frame everything as a sister problem. Poor decisions, entitlement, sloppy management, fixable in theory if the person involved wanted fixing. What sat in front of me now wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate, and it wasn't done alone. At work, I kept my door closed and focused on tasks that didn't require much interaction. I signed off on reports, approved timelines, answered questions with the kind of calm that comes from compartmentalizing by necessity. No one noticed anything different. That was the point. During lunch, I took my phone outside and called my attorney. He didn't soften it. He didn't dramatize it either. He explained what the signatures meant, what they didn't, and how often cases like this unfolded once the paper trail was complete. He outlined options without pushing me toward any of them. "This expands the scope," he said, "but it also clarifies responsibility." I thanked him and ended the call. My mother texted that afternoon asking if I could stop by the house that evening. She said Vanessa was stressed. She said family needed to talk things through face to face. She added that she'd made my favorite soup. I didn't answer. Vanessa tried next. Her message was stripped of the warmth she'd used earlier in the week. She said suppliers were asking questions. She said accounts were flagged. She said none of this made sense. I archived the conversation and went back to my screen. That night, I spread the documents across the desk again, this time grouping them by approval rather than date. The pattern sharpened. Vanessa initiated requests. My mother authorized them. Funds moved. Reports were filed late or not at all. When something didn't add up, another transfer followed to smooth it over. It wasn't chaos. It was maintenance. I sat back and let that settle. The anger came later, quieter than I expected. Not explosive. Just heavy. This wasn't about loyalty anymore. It was about trust that had been leveraged and broken on purpose. I thought about the night of the party, about how quickly my mother had moved to defend Vanessa, how naturally the words had come. Apologize. Keep the peace. Don't make a scene. It hadn't been instinct. It had been practice. The next morning, I met my attorney in person. His office was clean and understated, the kind of place where nothing looks urgent, even when it is. He walked me through the findings in order, stopping when I needed clarification, moving on when I didn't. Given the authorizations, he said, "This isn't just misappropriation. It's facilitation." I nodded once. I didn't ask him to repeat it. We discussed next steps, not confrontations, procedures, notices, timelines, how to protect my position while ensuring the process stayed clean. He reminded me again that nothing would happen all at once. "That's fine," I said. "I don't need it to." When I left his office, the sun was already dropping behind the buildings, the air sharp with the promise of another snowstorm. I walked a few blocks before getting in my car, letting the cold work through the edges of the day. At home, I changed into sweats and sat on the floor with my back against the couch, phone in hand. I scrolled through old photos without really seeing them. Holidays, birthdays, Vanessa in the center of most frames. My mother's arm always around her shoulder. My father called while I was still sitting there. I answered more out of habit than intention. He talked for a while without interruption, about stress, about misunderstandings, about how my mother was only trying to help. He said families sometimes bend rules for each other. "They don't break laws for convenience," I said, keeping my voice level. He went quiet. Then he said my name again, like that alone could reset things. I ended the call. The following days were busy in a way that left little room for reflection. Requests from my attorney, responses to compliance inquiries, documentation pulled and verified. Everything moving forward on parallel tracks that didn't intersect unless they were meant to. Vanessa's messages slowed to a stop. My mother sent one last note asking me to reconsider before things got out of hand. I didn't respond. At work, Major Alvarez asked if I was holding up. I told him yes. He believed me. Late one evening, as I was closing the laptop, a new email arrived with the subject line marked confidential. The body was brief. The attachments thorough. The final authorization log was complete. My mother's signature appeared again at the bottom of the page, clear and unmistakable. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and stood in the dark long enough to decide that this was no longer a private family matter I could manage quietly on my own. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning solution, the kind of neutral scent meant to signal professionalism. I set my phone face down on the table and adjusted the folder in front of me so it lined up with the edge. The screen on the wall stayed dark for now. The door opened without a knock. Vanessa walked in, first heels sharp against the floor, shoulders tight, like she was already bracing for impact. She didn't sit. She dropped her bag on the chair beside her and crossed her arms. My parents followed a step behind. My mother's eyes scanned the room, lingering on the empty chairs, the closed blinds. My father took the seat farthest from me and folded his hands like he was waiting for instructions. No one asked why we were there. I waited until the door closed, then picked up the remote and turned on the screen. The first slide was simple. Account summaries. Dates, totals, nothing emotional, just numbers. Vanessa scoffed. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I clicked to the next page. Vendor payments appeared highlighted in a muted yellow. Repeated names. Repeated amounts. The timeline ran across the bottom of the screen, steady and unbroken. My mother leaned forward slightly. "Allison, this isn't necessary." I advanced the slide. A flowchart replaced the numbers. Funds moving from business accounts to secondary accounts, then onward. The paths overlapped in ways that made the intent obvious even without commentary. Vanessa's face tightened. "You don't understand how retail works," she said. "Cash flow isn't linear." "That's true," I said. "Fraud is." The word landed cleanly. No raised voice, no accusation layered with emotion, just a term that fit. My father shifted in his chair. "Let's slow down," he said. "We're family." I clicked again. The authorization page filled the screen. Signature enlarged. Clear. Unmistakable. My mother inhaled sharply. Her hand moved to the edge of the table as if she needed the support. "That's not what it looks like," she said quickly. Vanessa needed help. Temporary help. I was trying to protect all of us. "By signing documents you weren't authorized to sign," I said. "Multiple times." Vanessa laughed once high and brittle. "You're acting like this was criminal." "It was," I said. "That's why we're here." She stepped closer to the table, palms flat against the surface. "You're overreacting. You always do. You don't get how hard it is to run something like this." "I get it," I said. "I also get what happens when money is moved without approval." My father cleared his throat. "We can handle this privately. There's no need to involve outsiders." I met his eyes. That stopped being an option when the paperwork crossed into felony territory. Silence stretched across the room, thick but contained. The projector hummed softly indifferent. My mother looked at me, then really looked like she was seeing someone she didn't recognize. "You would do this to us?" "I didn't do this," I said. "I found it." Vanessa shook her head. "You think this makes you powerful, sitting there with your little charts?" I pressed a button on the remote. The next slide displayed the contract she'd signed years ago. The conduct clause highlighted. The language plain. The consequences spelled out in black and white. "You agreed to this," I said. "Every line." She stared at the screen, then back at me. "You wouldn't enforce that." "I already have." My mother's breath hitched. "Allison, please." I picked up the folder and slid a document across the table toward them. Notices. Formal, stamped, dates filled in. "The accounts are frozen pending review," I said. "The loans have been recalled under the terms of the agreement. The house lease has been terminated." My father pushed his chair back abruptly. "You can't just take our home." "I can," I said. "And I did. Legally." Vanessa's composure cracked. "You're ruining my life." "You did that," I said. "I just stopped covering for it." She turned to my mother, voice rising. Tell her this is insane." My mother looked between us, her confidence draining with each second. "I was trying to keep things together," she said weakly. "You were," I said, "by sacrificing the one person who made it possible." My father stood and paced once, then stopped. "What do you want?" he asked. "An apology. Control." "I want compliance," I said. "And distance." Vanessa slammed her hand on the table. "You think you've won?" I didn't answer. I gathered the folder and stood the movement unhurried. "You have two options," I said. "Vacate the property quietly within the notice period and cooperate fully with the audit, or refuse and let the authorities handle the rest." My mother's eyes filled. My father stared at the floor. Vanessa's jaw worked like she was chewing through something bitter. "You're not our daughter," Vanessa snapped. I paused at the door and looked back at her. "That stopped mattering when you slapped me and expected nothing to change." I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The sound of the conference room didn't follow me. No shouting, no pleas. Just the low hum of a system doing what it was designed to do. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I walked to my car and drove away without checking the mirrors, the city sliding past in steady, orderly blocks. By the time I got home, my phone had filled with messages. Missed calls. Voicemails. None of them changed what had already been set in motion. I plugged the phone into the charger, placed it face down on the counter, and poured myself a glass of water, letting the quiet settle in around the edges of the room. The phone vibrated against the countertop. While I was rinsing a mug, the sound sharp enough to cut through the quiet. I didn't dry my hands before checking the screen. Vanessa's name sat there, followed by a string of missed calls stacked so tightly they blurred together. I set the phone down and finished what I was doing. By the time I picked it up again, there were new messages. Not long explanations. Short bursts. Questions without punctuation. Statements that contradicted themselves halfway through. She said a transfer hadn't gone through. She said payroll was late. She said vendors were calling her directly now, asking why invoices hadn't been paid. I read them once and put the phone back down. At work, the day unfolded like any other. Meetings stayed on schedule. Reports got approved. Someone cracked a joke during a briefing that landed well enough to break the tension in the room. No one there knew anything about my family, and I preferred it that way. During lunch, I stepped outside and walked a block just to feel the air. Snow had melted into slush along the curb, the streets gray and wet. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. She didn't lead with anger. She led with confusion. She said the house internet wasn't working properly. She said one of the credit cards had been declined at the grocery store. She asked if there was a system issue. There's a review in progress, I said. Everything that's happening is part of that. You didn't have to do it like this, she said. I did, I said. Because this is how it stays clean. She went quiet, then asked if Vanessa could talk to me. I said no, and ended the call. By the end of the day, the ripple effects had widened. Another automated notice came in, this one, confirming that discretionary spending privileges on several accounts had been temporarily suspended pending audit results. Plain language. No emotion. Vanessa noticed immediately. Her voicemail that evening was no longer controlled. She talked fast words tumbling over each other. She said employees were panicking. She said someone had threatened to walk out if payroll didn't clear. She said I was making her look incompetent. I listened to the message once and deleted it. The next morning, her tone shifted again. Panic stripped away the last layer of entitlement and left something raw underneath. She asked if I could release just enough to cover expenses. She said she'd explain everything later. She said she'd fix it. I didn't respond. At my desk, an email from my attorney confirmed what I already knew. Financial institutions were cooperating. Additional accounts had been flagged. The scope was expanding, not contracting. I forwarded the update to my secure folder and went back to work. Vanessa's social media presence disappeared by midday. Posts removed. Comments turned off. The boutique's account went silent. That silence was louder than anything she'd posted before. That afternoon, my father showed up unannounced at my apartment. I opened the door and saw him standing there, shoulders slumped, coat buttoned wrong. He looked older than he had the week before, like the weight had finally found him. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit right away. He paced the living room, hands clasped behind his back. "Your mother's a mess," he said. "Vanessa hasn't slept. This has gone too far." "It's gone exactly as far as it needed to," I said. He stopped pacing and faced me. "She's in trouble. She put herself there. She's your sister. And this is the consequence of her choices." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. "She says people are coming after her," he said finally. "People she borrowed from." That got my attention. "What kind of people?" He hesitated. "Not banks." I nodded once. "That's not my responsibility." He ran a hand through his hair. "She needs money. Just enough to get through this." "No," I said. "She's desperate. She should be." He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "How did you become like this?" "I didn't," I said. I stopped pretending. He left a few minutes later without another word. That night I slept through the first call. The second one woke me. Vanessa's number flashed across the screen, followed by a text that read, simply, "Please." I didn't answer. By morning, the situation had deteriorated further. A courier attempted to deliver a notice to the house. My mother refused to sign for it. Another arrived by email an hour later, stamped and time-coded. Vanessa's messages became incoherent. She accused me of betrayal. She accused my parents of weakness. She accused everyone but herself. Around noon, my mother called again, voice shaking. She took cash from the safe, she said. All of it. She said she'd pay it back. I closed my eyes for a moment and let that land. That money was for emergencies, my mother continued. For retirement. She didn't even ask. I said nothing. Later that evening, my father texted me a photo of the empty lockbox. The lining still sat neatly inside, undisturbed except for the absence of what had been there. Vanessa didn't answer her phone anymore. By the time I got home from work, snow had started falling again, heavier this time. I stood by the window and watched headlights blur as cars moved slowly through the storm. Somewhere out there, my sister was running from problems she'd created, carrying money that was never really hers. My phone buzzed one last time that night. A short message from my attorney confirming that additional protections had been put in place on remaining assets connected to the house. I acknowledged it and set the phone down. The heater clicked on, filling the room with a steady hum. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly, the cold settling in my chest. Outside, the storm kept coming, indifferent to who it buried first. The knock at the door came just after sunrise, sharp and deliberate, the kind that doesn't belong to neighbors or delivery drivers. I was already dressed, boots on, jacket zipped halfway. When I opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway, their posture neutral, hands visible, faces unreadable. They asked my name. I confirmed it. One of them explained they were serving notice related to the property in Park City. Standard procedure. No urgency in his voice, no judgment. Just information. I took the envelope, glanced at the seal, and nodded. Thank you. They left without another word. I set the envelope on the counter and poured coffee, letting the machine finish its cycle before opening it. The paperwork was exactly what I expected. Court stamped. Dates clearly marked. 30 days to vacate. Asset recovery authorized. Enforcement scheduled. I folded the notice once and slipped it back inside. At work, the day moved with the same steady rhythm it always had. I attended briefings, answered questions, signed off on logistics approvals that would ripple through systems far bigger than my personal life. In the background, my phone filled with notifications I didn't check. During a break, my attorney called. He didn't waste time. The sheriff will handle the eviction when the window closes, he said. Until then, utilities remain limited as outlined. Your parents have been notified through proper channels. And Vanessa, she's not at the property. We've confirmed that. I thanked him and ended the call. My mother called next. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. Her message was different from the others. No accusations, no guilt tripping, just fear. She said they didn't know where Vanessa was. She said people had been calling the house asking for her by name. She said the locks felt flimsy now that the place was so quiet. I didn't call her back. By afternoon, word had spread through whatever social circle my parents still had. Messages came in from distant relatives I barely remembered, asking if everything was okay, offering help in vague ways that required no follow-through. I ignored them all. When I got home that evening, I found another envelope taped neatly to my door, this one from a private asset recovery firm. Confirmation of coordination with local authorities. Timeline reiterated. Inventory checklist attached. I skimmed it and filed it away. The next few days blurred together in a way that felt oddly peaceful. Vanessa didn't resurface. No calls, no messages, no sightings. My parents stopped asking me to intervene and started asking practical questions instead. Where could they store things? What shelters were nearby? Whether the notice could be delayed a few days for the weather? I forwarded their questions to my attorney and stayed out of it. On the morning enforcement was scheduled, snow fell thick and heavy, muting the city. I didn't go to the property. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat at my desk at work and focused on a supply chain issue that had nothing to do with me personally. When my phone buzzed, I checked the screen without unlocking it. A single text from my attorney. It's underway. I set the phone down and finished the report. An hour later, another message came through. Photos attached. The front gate, the driveway. A county sheriff's vehicle parked cleanly along the curb. A private truck behind it. I didn't open the photos. Later that afternoon, my father called. I answered this time. His voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. He said they were standing outside the gate with what they could carry. He said the house was already colder than he remembered. He said the neighbors were watching. He didn't ask me to stop it. He asked me where they were supposed to go. I gave him the number my attorney had provided for temporary housing assistance. I told him the address was on the card the sheriff had given them. He was quiet for a long moment, then said my name again, slower this time, like he was trying to hold on to it. I ended the call. That evening, news broke locally about a woman detained near the state line for attempting to use altered identification. The article was short. No photos. Just a name and age and a list of charges pending review. Vanessa's name. I read it once and closed the tab. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. My parents moved into a small subsidized apartment on the edge of the city. My mother left a voicemail thanking me for the housing information and apologizing for not seeing things sooner. I didn't return the call. At work, my performance review came back clean. No flags, no concerns. My commanding officer signed off without comment. Everything I'd done had stayed within the lines. One evening as I was packing up to leave, Major Alvarez stopped by my office. I heard things resolved, he said, not asking how. They concluded, I said. He nodded. That's usually how it looks when it's done right. I drove home through streets still lined with snowbanks, the city settling into the quiet that comes after disruption. At my apartment, I set my keys down and stood there for a moment, listening to the familiar hum of the heater, the soft tick of cooling metal. The past weeks hadn't left me drained. They'd stripped things down to what mattered. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter phone, resting untouched beside it. The notifications had slowed to nothing. The silence felt earned. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the last traces of movement on the street below, smoothing everything into clean, indistinguishable lines. The first warm morning of March arrived without ceremony. Snow melted into thin streams along the curb, and the mountains looked closer than they had all winter. I left my window cracked as I got ready, the air carrying a hint of wet pavement and pine. It felt like the city was exhaling. At work, nothing had changed. That was the point. I moved through the day the same way I always had, checking in with my team, reviewing timelines, signing off where my name mattered. When the promotion notice came through, it didn't arrive with fanfare. Just a formal email, effective date, listed responsibilities, updated. I read it once, acknowledged it, and went back to what I was doing. No one mentioned my family. No one needed to. The court updates arrived in batches, concise and factual. Vanessa remained in custody pending further proceedings. The charges were specific and heavy enough to make bail unlikely. Grand larceny, financial fraud, identity misuse. The language didn't dramatize anything. It didn't have to. My parents adjusted to their new place slowly. The apartment was small and practical, the kind built to be easy to heat and harder to personalize. My mother left a voicemail describing the view from the window and how she'd started taking the bus again. My father mentioned a nearby grocery store and how quiet the building was at night. They didn't ask for money. That more than anything told me they finally understood the boundary. I didn't visit. Instead, I spent my weekends hiking trails that had been buried all winter. I met friends for coffee without checking my phone every few minutes. I slept through the night. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was settled. One afternoon, I drove up to Park City for the last time. The house stood behind the gate, freshly listed staging furniture arranged to suggest a life that had never really existed there. I met the agent, signed the papers, and walked through the rooms, once not lingering anywhere. The sale went quickly. Cash offer, clean close. I transferred the proceeds the same day. A week later, the paperwork for the foundation finalized. The mission statement was simple funding and mentorship for women transitioning out of military service into civilian careers. No speeches. No branding gimmicks. Just resources where they were needed. The first grant went out quietly. On a Friday evening, I ran into Major Alvarez at a small bar near base. We talked about work, about a training exercise coming up, about nothing important. When he asked how I was doing, I answered honestly. Better, I said. He raised his glass slightly. That's usually the sign you made the right call. My phone buzzed once on the bar. A message from my mother. Short. She said she hoped I was well. She said she was trying to do better. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for help. I replied with a single line, wishing her health and stability. That was enough. Spring moved in steadily after that. The days grew longer. The city softened around the edges. I found myself laughing more, not because anything was funny, but because the tension that had lived under everything was gone. One evening, as I was closing the blinds, I caught my reflection in the glass. Same posture, same calm expression. But something underneath had shifted, not hardened, clarified. I thought about the party, about the slap, about the certainty with which my sister had acted. I thought about how easy it would have been to absorb it, to smooth things over, to keep playing the role that made everyone else comfortable. I didn't regret walking out. I didn't regret what followed either. There's a version of loyalty that asks you to disappear, so others can stay exactly the same. That version is loud, persistent. It dresses itself up as love. But it only survives when no one pushes back. I pushed back, not with shouting, not with scenes. Just with the truth, documented and enforced. The heater clicked on as the evening cooled, the sound steady and familiar. I poured a glass of water and stood by the counter watching the lights come on across the street. People move through their routines, unaware of how close everything always is to changing. I turned off the light, picked up my keys, and stepped out into the evening feeling the weight of nothing but what I chose to carry. The hardest lesson in all of this wasn't about money contracts or even betrayal. It was learning that sharing blood with someone doesn't give them unlimited access to your life, your peace, or your future. Family drama doesn't turn into family revenge stories because someone is cruel. It happens because someone finally stops accepting what should never have been normal in the first place. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been pushed to the edge by family expectations, favoritism, or quiet manipulation, you're not alone. Stories like this exist because they happen more often than people admit. If you want more real revenge stories, family revenge stories, grounded in truth, discipline, and consequences, make sure to subscribe to the channel. New stories like this are coming, and you won't want to miss the next one.